ain't going back. Not gonna buy into all that. Hey, hey, ain't gonna hide. Gonna let all the fears slide. Got mother nature, it's on my side. Got all of the loving growing inside.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome again to the New Now. I'm here with Jerry Marzinsky and Lynn. We're going to do a new episode of Mind Monsters. I believe we're up to number 11 right now. And let's say we'll call this one, Do You See What I See? And hey, Jerry, maybe you want to take us in and introduce Lynn since you know her a little better than I, and we'll get right into it.
Yeah, a little bit. I wanted to bring Lynn on because I've been talking about these voices that schizophrenics hear for years. Okay, and I know I've done a couple of shows on the New Now with regard to these voices that are entities. They are not
10 of them.
10 of them. 10?
Yeah, 10. We've done 10
Wow,
over
holy
last
cow.
year. Yeah.
All right, so I don't need to say a whole lot here. But these entities, these voices that schizophrenics hear are not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia says. They run a very consistent, predictable, repeatable course of patterns. And if they're running patterns, they can't be hallucinations. Now, you can find a listing of those patterns on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com under articles. And anybody can see these patterns. It's not like the psychiatric mafia telling you, oh, it's a biological brain chemical imbalance of the brain. I mean, how's anybody going to check that out? If you have schizophrenic in your house or you're working with schizophrenics, get this list and you'll see it for yourself. They run consistent, repeatable patterns. They are not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia said. Okay, and there is no chemical brain imbalance. You know, if they're telling you that, you go to your psychiatrist and ask him, where's the baseline? Where's the test for what chemicals are out of balance in the brain and which aren't? They don't have one. None ever existed. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be. It's a big farce that they're putting over your eyes, and they're making $14.7 billion a year selling these antipsychotic drugs to people that they have brainwashed through the educational system and the psychiatric mafia. So I want to turn it over to Lynn and let her tell you about what she saw in the psychiatric ward, because she's the only one I've seen who, she works as a nurse. She's an RN. I think you're still working, right, Lynn?
It's part-time. Yeah.
Part-time. So she's about ready to retire. So she's willing to speak out about this stuff. And what's particularly interesting is the particular entity she saw was one that represented patients that hear a whole bunch of different voices speaking all at once. Okay. So I'll turn it over to Lynn now and just chime in from time to time.
Hey, Lynn. Love to hear your story.
Hi, Lorenzo. Oh, and thank you so much for inviting me on too. It's my pleasure. As Jerry mentioned, I've been a nurse for 40 years. I just turned 60 in May, but we won't mention that. And I went back to school. 17 of that has been in palliative and end-of-life care, which are also overly medicated for hallucinations, but another type of hallucinations and with different types of medication. So again, it kind of falls into place with that. But I had gone back to further my degree as a nurse. I also have a degree in biological science. And I had gone into this facility for a whole week, and we would spend one day in different places within the facility. And the very first day that we arrived, we were placed in the intake area of this facility. And there were 8 nurses and the instructor. The instructor had gone to the nurses' station to get our assignments and came in. While we're all standing there, this young woman walks up to our group and she points at me and she says, "You can help me. I know you can." And of course, I'm looking over my shoulder. I'm like, oh, please, please, please don't let her be talking to me, because I wanted to be Lynn, the student nurse that day, not Lynn, the weirdo. So it just so happened that the teacher came and ushered us out and said, "Don't make eye contact. Don't talk to them." And we went into another room. And
and I want to jump in at that point because they do that all the time. They make it look like it's so dangerous that if you look at somebody in the eye, they're going to attack you. You know, and that's one of the false reasons that they don't let researchers on the front lines. they scare the dickens out of new employees. They did that at the prison. They do that at the psych institutes. Oh yeah, these people are so dangerous. I've been working with them for 45 years and I've never been attacked, ever. And I only know one person who has, other than attendants. Okay, I just wanted to get that in there. I've never seen a researcher on the front lines. All the research comes from the institutions and big pharma. You don't. It's not coming from the front lines where the truth is. Go ahead.
Absolutely, that is so true. What Jerry said. As a matter of fact, we had to sign papers that. Actually, let me back up a little bit. And myself and a fellow nurse the two of us were placed back into this area where the patients were intake. We had to sign papers that if we got hit or bitten or somebody attacked us, that we couldn't hold the facility responsible. So I have had the gift of second sight ever since I was a little girl. I've seen things. Of course, traditional religion did not support that. So there were periods of time in my life where I denied what I was seeing, and I would run scared out of the room just as much as anyone else. And I'm kind of bringing up this point because it kind of covers what I'm about to say next. I had inadvertently purchased a haunted house unbeknownst to me that was so haunted that I never moved in. I spent 2 nights there. But some of the things that I observed and that I learned from connecting with people of like mind helped my gifts to flourish and helped this situation even make more sense. This young lady, as I said, she was in the area. My fellow nurse and I, we were sitting down at the picnic tables. They had picnic tables that were bolted to the floor. We were sitting, and then we were doing our charting on our patients, and the young lady comes over and she sits with us, and she appears to be like maybe 20 years old, very early 20s. She had a very short haircut. Her skin was kind of ashen colored, and she had on shorts and a midriff top with little tiny thin spaghetti straps. So I had clear view of a lot of the skin areas on her body, and she was just brought in to the intake area. And I'm looking at her, and this poor woman is covered in claw marks. She's got claw marks coming out of her ear, out of her nose. I mean, she had claw marks on places that she could not have possibly have done them to herself. And she was saying that she was hearing voices, and that one in particular had a long claw that was scratching her insides, her female parts, and the institution was claiming that they were self-inflicted. Now,
I've seen the same thing. I've witnessed the same thing.
Yeah, and how I know what the claw mark looks like is because in the house that I bought, my best friend was clawed on her back and stomach to the point of bleeding by a demon that was in that house. And yes, it was a real one, because a lot of times people will call with a ghost in their house, and the first thing they say is, I have a demon, and it's usually not one. It's usually something else. But these claw marks on this girl, they look like cat scratches, were identical to the ones that I saw on my friend that day. So I knew that they were claw marks. And she started to talk about how she had trauma when she was like 10 years old till she was 14. Her pastor or minister of her church was molesting her. Then her mother got remarried when she was 14, and the stepfather started raping her, and she ended up running away at age 16, and then got involved in devil worship, and she realized that wasn't for her either. And now she's hearing these 25 different voices. So as she's sitting next to us, they have periods of time in the psychiatric ward where the patients do different things. They'll go to group sessions with people with other issues, or they'll go to private sessions with their psychiatrist or social worker, or whoever else they need to meet with to get their medicine balanced or to talk about care plans. And it just so happened that she was called away, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching her walk away. And as she's walking away from us, I can see on her back where she has over both shoulders clusters, like clustered grapes, but as big as potatoes over each shoulder. And I mean, if you were to take a standard size pillowcase, you could have put them over that. They were attached to her shoulder with a hollow vine looking thing that was twisted, that was kind of a tannish brown color in areas. And they hooked at the top of her shoulders and then clasped underneath her armpit. And I'm like, oh my God. That poor woman really is hearing 25 different voices. She's got attachments on her back. And some of the heads were inverted.
Do you have the drawing of that thing? You had a drawing at one time.
Yeah, let me check real quick. because I thought that I had it out here today for this. No, I don't, but I do have, I thought I saw it here. I put it out here today. You know what? I'll find it before the show's over.
If you could take a picture as well and send it to me, that would be great if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. I don't mind. I'll be happy to do that. I can even draw another one really, really quick when you're talking with Jerry. But so she walked away, and some of the heads were inverted, so the eyes were on the bottom and the mouths were on the top. And as she walked away, she left, and I'm like, oh my God, this poor woman. So when she came back from her appointment, her room was only a couple doors down from the patient that I had been assigned. And I walked down to her room and I knocked on her door frame, and she invited me in. And I told her, I said, look, what I'm about to tell you, if you repeat this, they're going to think that you're crazier and keep you in here longer. So, you can't repeat this. They're not going to believe you, basically anyway. And I told her, I said, I believe that you are hearing 25 different voices because you've got attachments on your back. And she turned to walk away from me. And something normally when I remove spirits from people, I have a preparation that I have to go through. For one thing, I need to be well rested. I can't be sick with the flu. I have to have my salt baths and prepare myself for it mentally and physically, because I don't want to carry any attachments home with me if I'm helping get them off of somebody else, So there's a ritual that I kind of go through, and I didn't have time to do that. And I was under a lot of stress. But something just overcame me, and I just took my fingers and I put them underneath those horn-like things, and I lifted them off, and they started to all of a sudden separate and come away and fall to the ground. They started rolling around. I started stomping them with my feet, and a few of them rolled away. And she turned around, and she didn't know that I was doing it. She turned around and she said, it feels like you removed grass off my back, like you were pulling grass. So she actually felt me pulling them off of her, but she didn't know what I was doing. And I said, look, this is a temporary fix. I said, I pulled a major portion of them off of you, but some of them have rolled over by your bed. I'm sure that your house is infested with them. So when you get out of here, you need to go and find somebody that can remove these things off of you and finish that part of the thing. And then I repeated to her again, and if you repeat what I'm saying to you again, you're going to be in here longer. So the idea is to get you out of here sooner so that you can go and get help. So about a little longer than a year later, I was in Walmart, and there were these two girls at the end of the aisle, and they were whispering to each other, and they were looking at me, and I'm crouched down looking at candles, and I'm thinking maybe I've got toilet paper on my shoe or my zipper's down or something. They're whispering and looking at me, and all of a sudden I hear this girl say to the other one, she says, I know that's her. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's a fan that's read my book, So I stand up, and the girl walks over, and she looks kind of familiar to me, but I didn't I couldn't place where I had seen her. And so she said to me, do you remember me? And I'm like, you look familiar, but I'm sorry, I can't place you. And she said, you're the nurse that helped me. And then it hit me, because they're like parasites sucking the energy. And she had an ashen appearance while she was in the hospital, almost a yellow appearance. And now she's pink. She's got her makeup on. She's lost weight. She's got a beautiful blonde bob, and she's in school, going to school to be a dental hygienist. And she told me, she said, when I got out, I went and got somebody to help me. And now I'm only on a low dose of anti-anxiety medication as needed. She says, and I hardly ever even take that. So I want to underscore
that parasitic part that you said, because these entities are parasitic. They do suck the energy out of the patients, and the schizophrenics will tell you that. You can ask them, how much energy do you have before the voices attack and how much energy you have after, and there's a marked difference in the amount of energy they have after the voices attack. So these things are parasitic. They're feeding off of them and off of all of us.
Lynn,
to different extents.
May I ask you a question? Like, you mentioned that she tried the satanic church for a little while, or the satanic thing. Because as Jerry had mentioned, I have found as well that perhaps these are vampiric and that they need to be invited in. Did she make any promises at the time? Did she ever discuss that with you? Inviting these attachments into her life?
No, what she said is that she realized that wasn't for her. And the thing that I have found what I have found in removing these attachments. It's like, for instance, people with addiction have an Archon type attachment that fits like a backpack on their backs. And the difference is with the addiction, they are invited in, and with the schizophrenia, they're not. But usually there is some form of trauma. And she was so young when she went in to do that devil worship that she didn't really have enough intelligence about it to even understand what she was getting into. And to me, to be able to commit to somebody and allowing it into your life, you have to know what you're doing. So, I mean, it was leading her in, but for something, helped her to go in a different direction. And maybe it was her being admitted into that facility that made it stop. So, that was the cutting the cord. So I don't know, but she said that she knew that it wasn't for her and that was something that she should not have done.
Right. I'm just wondering how she figured out it wasn't for her. Like, did she say anything specific?
Nope. She just said that it wasn't for her. And
Okay.
I don't know if it was the influence of being in the facility around a lot of people that were not for that. You know what I mean? Or what exactly the reasoning was. It's just that's all that she said about it.
Okay.
So anyway, did you want me to continue? Go ahead
Yes,
and continue.
please. Yeah, please.
Okay. The next day, of course, we were in several different places. Every day of the week, we were in a different area. Also, I want to back up to her. I continued that day then to walk around the facility, and there were, other nurses and things in other areas that I got to walk over into. And I said, hey, by chance, does your patient have schizophrenia? And they're like, yeah, how'd you know? And I'm like, oh, I just wondered, because I could see the attachments on them. And I could see the difference between the attachments on them and the attachments on the people with the addiction. I only got it wrong once, because one person had a combination of an addiction and they were claiming to have, hearing multiple voices. So,
Lynn, can you describe what those attachments look like? Were they all the same with schizophrenia, or were they different?
They were pretty much the same and they clung together like the grapes. They were the same. And all of these voices, like I said, sometimes inverted, sometimes sideways, but they were all in an area where they could be heard talking through their ears. These voices are not coming from their head. They're not coming from their mind. They're being whispered into their ears. Whatever it is talking to them in their ears. And they make the mistake of being told that they're hallucinating, that they're out of their mind, that they're bonkers and all of these sorts of things. And the medical facility turns it around on the patient, and then they medicate them. And working on a flip side with people that are getting ready to exit and cross over, which is a beautiful thing, but sometimes they start seeing loved ones coming in to help them transition even a year before they die. And when they start talking about them, they start running for the meds too. So, to balance that, they're not considering them crazy, but they're considering them, again, hallucinating or whatever. And they use different kinds of medication, actually, even for some of those, like Seroquel and Buspar and things like that. Whereas, they go more into some other stuff for the schizophrenia, using that.
Lynn,
but go ahead, I'm sorry.
Could you see the effects that those medications had on these entities? Was that evident to you at any point?
It actually exacerbated it, because it weakened the patient's ability to energetically fight them off. It actually shrinks the energy when people are on a substance that is chemically controlling. Those chemicals are energy in themselves, and we are energy, and we're water and energy, but we're energy. So when they would take the medication, it seemed to even leave them more open to the attacks. It didn't, because they weren't hallucinating, so it didn't take it away. It just made it so that they were either slurring their words, they had that Thorazine shuffle and the shaking of the hand while they're trying to walk, and the thick tongue with the verbalization, and they were still seeing these things, but they were more aware that if I keep talking about them, they're going to give me more drugs. So a lot of them didn't mention them as much. But
yeah, I saw the same thing. They saw that if they kept complaining to the psychiatrist that they were still hearing voices, they got drugged even more.
Yes,
and
and
it looked to
they were
me like the drugging didn't stop the voices. It just made them care less about them while
Mm.
they're suffering all these horrible side effects at the same time.
exactly, and they were more aware of the medication feeling than they were of even, the I mean, they were still aware of the voices and things like that, but they were more aware of the medication making them drag, like have a dragging feeling almost, and just you can see it even change their demeanor and the way that their mouth moves and the way that they talk when they're given these medications. A lot of times, I mean, Jerry, how many times have you seen the Thorazine shuffle? I know
Oh,
probably hundreds of times.
yeah, hundreds
It,
of times, and it didn't cure anything.
it didn't.
Very seldom did it ever permanently get the voices gone, and that was only in the early stages.
So,
You know,
so, so, so Lynn, what was your job supposed to be in that facility?
I was a student nurse. I had gone back to school. I'd already been a nurse, but I wanted to further my degree. So I went in as a student nurse.
So this was a
As
long time ago, or recently you went back, or like how long ago was
well,
this?
oh gosh, probably 17 years ago.
Okay.
So yeah. And prior to that, I was working as a nurse in a facility where, I mean, I had one lady, if you don't mind that Jerry, if I jump ship and tell him about Abigail, who had the wherewithal to understand that she was on medication, yet she was still seeing things and there was a funny situation that had happened with her, if you'd like me to share that.
I would love to
yeah,
hear
go
it.
for it.
Okay. Abigail was a patient that came to the facility that I was working in with her husband because her husband's health was declining. And the facility that I was working in had 3 levels of care. I worked in the skilled unit. So they moved in, they had no children, and all the relatives had passed away and things like that. So Abigail slipped and fell and fractured her hip, and she ended up on my unit post-surgery to be cared for. And there was one day that I walked into her room and she said to me, Lynn, do you think that I'm crazy? And I had a rapport built up with her. And so I was teasing her. I'm like, define crazy. I was just teasing her a little bit. And she says, no, no, no. She says, I mean, crazy, crazy. And I said, well, no, of course not. Why would you say that? And she said, well, I see my parents. And I know my parents have been gone for a long time, but it makes me happy to see them. And now, because I'm seeing them, the doctor wants to start me on medication for hallucinations, and I don't want to not see my parents anymore. And so I told her, in report, they said that you were going to be discharged tomorrow morning. And as your advocate, if you're of sound mind, you can refuse. You don't have to take the medication if you don't want to. And of course, she was happy with that. So she goes home. 6 months later, she comes back. Her health is starting to decline. And now, in addition to seeing her parents, she's seeing a woman with dark hair that comes to her room to visit with a little girl. And this was so real to her that she was sneaking cakes and cookies back to her room to give to the little girl, which was creating a bug problem. So we had to stop her from doing that. But there was one day in particular that I had volunteered to work. I was working a night shift. I volunteered to work a day shift for a friend of mine who needed the day off. And all the residents were back in their rooms. They had finished eating. So I'm going down the hallway with my med cart to do treatments. And as I'm passing by, I noticed that Abigail is in her room. She's sitting in a recliner with a big picture window, with an air conditioner underneath it, like the American hotels have. And she's leaning forward with a piece of yellow butterscotch wrapped candy. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm noticing her, and there's this woman and this little girl standing in front of her. And I'm like, oh, Abigail's got guests today. Isn't that nice? She's got some visitors. And I continue to walk forward a few steps, and I'm like, well, hey, wait a minute. I don't remember them signing in at the nurse's station. And legally, we have to have a head count just in case there's an emergency, so that the fire department knows how many souls we have in the building that need to be gotten out. So I stepped back. I knocked on her door frame. She invited me in. And when I walk in the room, there's nothing there. She's still leaning forward with that candy. Looks like she's trying to feed the air conditioner if anybody else had passed by, but she was trying to give the candy to the little girl. The way that I see ghosts is out of my peripheral vision. I can see them as plain as I can see you. I can tell you what they have on, what their hair color is, even their eye color if they're close enough. From a distance, they're kind of opaque. like a reflection in a plate glass window. If you're walking in the daytime into a mall and you see the reflection of yourself, they appear like that to me. And when they're very, very much up close, I'll see a waffling to the air like gas fumes or like vapors coming off of a hot road is how they look to me. So when I walked into her room, I see the waffling right next to me of the air. So Abigail, and I mean, I saw them so clearly. The woman had on a denim skirt and a white peasant blouse. She had long, long black hair parted down the middle. The little girl standing in front of her had on a little light blue dress with a pinafore, little Mary Jane shoes, bangs, dark haired, very cute little girl, looked to be about 5 years old. And Abigail says to me, she says, I want you to meet my friends. Isn't the little girl beautiful? And I said, yes, she is. And she comes forward and she's like, and you see them? And I said, yes. And she said, don't tell anybody because they'll think you're crazy and put you on medication. So here this woman was now medicated to the hilt for her hallucinations. The hallucinations weren't stopping because she was still seeing them. And she had the wherewithal to know the difference and to warn me, be careful what I say because they might start giving me the medication. So with that being said, and I mean, and I have even another example with a blind patient that you can't hallucinate if you're blind, and if you've got somebody, and I'll be happy to share that one with you too, and then we can get back on track with the mental stuff if you want.
Yep, I would love to hear it.
Okay, I had a lady that had been on my ward for 2 weeks. She was in an active transition, and her son and daughter, they come to my nurse's station and say to me, Mom's talking to people in the room that aren't there. Well, the thing about Edna is Edna had been blind for 10 years, totally blind. She couldn't see shadows. She couldn't see anything, nothing, no light glimmers, nothing. So I say to them, and I said, well, let me walk down to your room, your mom's room with you to see if I can help see if she needs any, adjusting or anything to make her more comfortable. Although I expected to hear that she was speaking to people in the room because this happens a lot, where they start talking to spirits that are coming in. And the thing about people that are getting ready to transition is that they can hear the filters start to efface, so they can hear the telepathy of the spirit world as well as they can hear the verbal speech of the people that are still embodied. So when I went into the room, Edna was sitting at a slant. She was smiling. She was reaching up into the sky with both hands as if she was receiving something very fragile and delicate like a snowflake because she was being so careful. And I said to her, I said, Edna, I said, who's here? And she said, George. Well, her daughter had to sit down because she said, George is my father. And George died X amount of years ago. And then Edna pipes up and she says, and he's glad that you're taking good care of Pixie. Pixie was Edna's poodle. When George passed away because Edna was blind, the son had to take possession of Pixie, the poodle, who was still very much alive, an elderly dog, but still very, very much alive. And he told me that story. And he said to me, do you think my mom is hallucinating? And you can't come out as a medical professional in a facility that you work for and say, no, I don't think that she's hallucinating. I think your dad is here. So I turned it around and I asked him, I said, well, do you think that she's hallucinating? And he says, well, I don't know. And I said, well, would you mind if I try something? And he agreed. And I said to Edna, Edna, can I ask George a question? And she nods her head, yes. And I said, what color is your son's shirt? Edna said yellow. He was wearing a yellow Ralph Lauren polo shirt. And she said yellow because George could see what color it was able to tell her, and she verbalized it through. And all of a sudden, the son got it. He says, hi, Dad. He realized that his dad was in the room. But the thing is how can a blind person hallucinate if they can't see?
Maybe their third eye is working. I've heard sometimes when
obviously, yes. Yeah. Obviously, her third eye was working. Type thing. But she was focused in on George. But George, I believe that George told her what color the shirt was because the question was directed to him. And what I have found with people when they get ready to pass and they're in that rallying stage where they're kind of in and out, in and out. And sometimes it looks like the lights are on, but nobody's home. And then they perk up and their toes perk and their eyes brighten and they start talking about things that they've seen on the other side and giving messages even sometimes that people miss a very, very important time that they can speak to people on the other side themselves through the person that's transitioning if that spirit is in the room. And people miss out on that a lot.
Did Abigail know that little girl? I meant to ask that question from the previous short story.
You know, I don't know. Well, she seemed to have made friends with them, so she must have known the little girl and the woman from somewhere, but she didn't. She just introduced them as her friends. So she didn't introduce them with like a name or something like that. You know, she's like, I want you to meet my friends. And isn't the little girl beautiful? So
you don't know if she knew her, you know, maybe when she was little or previously in her life or anything like that.
No, I don't know, but I know that when I watched my own mother cross over, and when she was when people were coming forward to greet her, there were a lot of people in that group that I did recognize from this lifetime, and there were people that I didn't. But my mother knew who they were when she crossed over. May
I ask one personal question?
Yes.
You know, the people that are hallucinating or have been told they're hallucinating and they end up taking the antipsychotic drugs, how does that happen? Like, do they volunteer? Does her husband insist? Did she listen to a doctor when she was sorry later that she shouldn't have? Like, how did they get to the situation where they know they're not hallucinating and then they end up on these drugs anyways? Like, what's the process in between, you know, those 2 points in their life?
You know, 99.9% of the time, they're told that they're hallucinating. They believe that they're hallucinating. So when those pills in that cup are served up with the other 25 that they're taking, they just put them in their mouth and take them.
Okay.
Yep. I see the same thing. They're told you need these pills. You're hallucinating. I mean, the psychiatric mafia and psychiatry are totally devoid of any spiritual knowledge of anything. You know, they don't believe in voices. They don't believe in spirits. And they're never going to find the cause of schizophrenia as long as they keep that attitude up. You know, it's like pouring Thorazine on a magnetic field and expecting that magnetic field to dissipate because you poured some kind of medicine on it. These things are energetic. They're not of the physical world. They're not of the physical universe. So physical pills are not going to get rid of them. The only reason those things work is that they calm the people down. You know, and the voices want them upset. They need to suck that negative, low vibration energy out of them. That's what they feed off of.
So Lynn, have you had? Yeah, sorry. I was just curious about your process in your life. Have you had these experiences your whole life since you were a little girl? Like seeing
I have.
Yeah.
I have. When I was 5 years old, my brother was 7. We lived just 3 short blocks behind a hospital that was connected to what they used to call back then a nursing home, which now they call skilled facilities. So, and there were Indian mounds on the other side of that hospital. So it was commonplace for us to see people in patient gowns walking through our house that short of a distance from the hospital. I mean, to us, it was like, there's a toaster, there's, you know, the can opener, there's a dead person. So we were accustomed to that. But there was one, for instance, because of course I was born in 1963, since I'm 60, and those were things that you didn't talk about, because they would literally send the men in white coats to pick you up and haul you away and give you a lobotomy if you talked about things like that. So you wanted to keep it quiet, you know, within the household. And of course, you know, you're not seeing anything. There's nothing there. Da 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 da. But we were seeing them at the same time. And there was one day in particular that my brother and we were in my parents' bedroom, and I was in my mother's jewelry box putting on the earrings, and my brother was on the floor playing with his car. And I turned to show my brother how glamorous I had made myself, and he's turned fixated on the wall. And there's this, so I turned to look to see what he's looking at, and there's this misting in the corner, which I've since learned is called ectoplasm, and it is a portal, and it was forming in the corner of the wall, and in stepped my brother's best friend, John, then John's mother, father, and brother, and they were all just standing there in the mist, smiling at us. Well, my brother gets up to run out of the room to get my mother. I get up and run out in the other direction to get my mother, and of course, he found her first, and he told her, he said, "Mom, John's here with his family." And my mom's like, "Well, I didn't even hear anybody knock." You know, she's straightening herself. She's coming from the laundry room to see, you know, that where they are. And he says, "And they're in your bedroom." And she's like, "They're in my bedroom? Who let them in my bedroom?" So when they came back into the bedroom, of course, there was nothing there. And my brother got in trouble. And of course, I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to get in trouble too. But the very next day we have a spring break during our school year for a week. It was the first day back to school after that week. And my brother was on the bus and little John wasn't there. I usually would sit with him on the bus. And then he got back to the classroom and John's desk was right next to his. They actually shared a big table with 2 chairs pulled up to it. And John wasn't there. And so when they said the Pledge of Allegiance, the teacher stood up in front of the class and announced that John would not be returning to class because he and his entire family perished in an auto accident the day before, and it happened that day. So when we got home, of course, my mother had heard about that, and she didn't really know what to say because John and his family had come to say goodbye to my brother. And that's what we got from that. But it was commonplace. It wasn't until I was about 10 that my mother rerouted with a religion called the Jehovah's Witnesses that took me in front of the elders because I was seeing things telling me that I was possessed, that I was demonized, that I was seeing was demons and all of these horrible things that was going to happen to me at 10 years old. And it scared me so bad that even though I continued to see things, I'd run out of the room just as fast as anybody else. Whew, there's a ghost. So, and it wasn't until coming forward that I purchased that house as a single mother with my 2 kids that was so haunted that I never moved in, that I was able to reconnect with people of like mind. Then I didn't feel so strange because now I started to realize that there were actually people like me out there, and I started to make friends that way.
Is that why you became a
did you
nurse,
ever
do you
see
think?
attachments? Do you see attachments on other people as you're walking down the sidewalk as you go places?
I see them even in the grocery store. Sometimes I kind of avoid them because some of the things even have like tentacle things that kind of reach out. So, you can pick up something at the grocery store that's not yours if you are not protecting your energy field. So yeah, they're everywhere. It's not just people with schizophrenia, but usually the placement is different for those types of things. I had a lady that came to me that literally had one. She said that it felt like she was pregnant, only the baby was on the outside of her stomach. And sure enough, she had an attachment there, and it had this large root thing that kind of went down in her spinal column into her stomach. So sometimes they can even enter into the body. Parts of them can enter into the body, and they're constantly looking for a free ride, with other people, and they'll attach on it because they want to create havoc in that person's life. They feed off the negativity. It's their chocolate. Anything that they can do to disrupt, to create chaos, to create job loss, sadness, depression, lack of sleep, arguing, anything like that, they enjoy doing because that's their candy. So, they'll try to hitch a ride on just about anybody. And I've even mentioned that too about pain, about issues with people with pain trying to seek relief. We've talked about that too.
Is this why you became a nurse? These experiences you had when you were younger?
No, I as a little girl, I always loved my baby dolls, and I was a people person. I either wanted to be a airline stewardess, but I wasn't skinny enough, or I wanted to be a nurse. So I became the nurse. But I have gained so much from being a nurse and being able to help, especially working in end-of-life care and palliative care with people that are getting ready to actively pass. I've seen hundreds of people pass away, and there's such a beauty to it and such a peacefulness to it that I wrote a book called Colors of Heaven, Beginnings Never End, because I wanted to help take the stigma of death and dying away for people who have been diagnosed with terminal illness, who maybe have lost a loved one. But yeah, that's, that's why I did that. So to help, shed some different light on it and make it not so. The thing about it is that we don't die. We shed our skin and we go. So people don't seem to realize that that's not the last time you're going to see your loved one. You will see them again. So if you just think of them being gone on a long vacation or something, and keep in mind that, they're there for the graduations. They're there for your kid's soccer game. They're there for all of that. They're probably sitting in the empty seat because they usually don't sit on top of people. But or they'll be up in a bleachering effect. They're always there for all of it. They're even making plans to attend it even before you have planned it, because they can see into the future and they know when it's coming. So
sorry to interrupt before, Jerry, did you have a question?
I'm sorry.
Did you ever work with psychiatrists, Lynn?
I didn't work with psychiatrists. I just, well, there were psychiatrists that would come into the ward, but most of the people that would come in there were student doctors. So they were student doctors for geriatrics, student doctors for different things, to have their exposure, because they put them in the places with the old people first. So if somebody dies, they don't get sued. I mean, I don't mean that to sound awful, but I mean, they put you in those settings because, there's less risk in that way. If that even makes sense, they're not going to put you in on a ward with younger people maybe having more things wrong with them. They're going to set you with an older person who's maybe had things that have needed to be cured or has been taking medication to help with something for a long time, so that there's not as much a margin for error.
What about the staff on the psych ward? Did you see attachments on them?
A few of them, yes, because a few of them had a little drinking problem after work, or they liked their cigarettes. I mean, the Archons don't so much get on people with the cigarettes, although I have seen dead people standing around people on their cigarette breaks trying to sniff, like to get into the smoke or to get into whatever the feeling is the person's getting from the smoke, even though when we cross over, we keep all of our senses. However, with the smell, it's not smell like we smell because we have an olfactory nerve, so we can actually smell. It's more of a memory recall thing where they can think of it and remember what it is, or to experience it through the person that's actually doing it. Yeah, people wouldn't smoke anymore if they see what I see standing around people.
And what's the most what would be the most surprising or shocking thing you've ever witnessed with regard to these things?
In a mental hospital facility or in public?
In public, overall, either one.
Well, I remember walking into a pub and there was a lady sitting with a guy at a bar and they were getting a little romantic, and she had a rock glass with wild turkey or something in it. There was a brown colored liquor, and there was a dead man standing next to her with no head. And he actually had his head sitting on the bar with his nose up over the drink, and it was kind of wiggling like he was trying to get a sniff, but there were also some other ones trying to enter into her through her back to get the sensation of what she, to feel the buzz, so to speak, that they wanted to get from the person that was actually drinking it. That was, I mean, I see some gory stuff sometimes that I really wish that I didn't, so I kind of can turn it on and off, but sometimes it sneaks up on me. Like that time, I didn't expect to walk in and see a headless man standing there holding his head next to a lady, and it was pretty shocking. And of course, she had a little Archon thing on her back, and so did her romantic partner. So yeah, I see all kinds of stuff. I've seen aliens. I've seen a lot of things.
You said there were aliens at your mom's funeral. What did they look like?
When I've also seen the little gray ones in a patient's room one time, but those were magnificently beautiful. And I have to kind of tell the story of my mom passing in order to be able to explain that, if that's okay. I don't want to hog the whole show here.
Go for it.
Lorenzo, are you okay with that?
Yeah, too? We're here to hear your story, so please, I would love to hear it.
Okay. When the thing about people is when they're getting ready to die, and first of all, let me just say that there are three kinds of death. There's a natural death, which we most have. There's a sudden death, and there's a near-death experience. And all of them are handled differently on the other side. My mother had a natural death, and a lot of times too, they'll go around, they'll start talking the day before, like, oh, they know that they're going to be dying. They talk about, will you watch my dog or my cat if something happens to me? Or, I'm going home tomorrow. They'll talk about it. My mom was telling people goodbye, and even told this one lady whose dog had just been put down a couple of days earlier that she would help watch over the dog until the lady could transition over and collect the dog someday when she died too. And she was telling everybody that she was going home tomorrow. And sure enough, she passed away the next day at around 1:30 in the afternoon. And the thing is a lot of times too, what I've learned in my profession is that sometimes the energetic part of the body, or the soul, if you want to call it that, sometimes will stay in until the very last minute, and sometimes it'll leave early, sometimes even days early, and let the body just finish, the physical part of it just finish. My mother was one that chose to stay in until the last minute. And this was obvious because even though she could no longer verbalize, she could no longer open her eyes, she would move her eyebrows up and down and try to mouth words whenever spoken to, and it was appropriate. People would come into the room and they'd say, "Hi, Phyllis," and she'd go back at them. So I was aware that she was still there. As I'm sitting in her room, I'm in the recliner next to her, I'm holding her hand and talking to her, of course. I'm noticing that ectoplasmic wall, there was an ectoplasmic wall that started to form ceiling to floor and side to side. And I could see movement on the other side. Sometimes I could see a shoulder peek out or a pant leg peek out. And I say a pant leg because it had a cuffed pant leg. So it was kind of like a 1940s style pants with the pleats and the cuffs kind of thing with the wingtip shoes. And that was very obvious. I could see that. And up towards the front, and I will say this, and Jerry's heard me say this 100 times, when our loved ones come forward to retrieve us, they do show up in clothes because nobody wants to see mom naked. So I think most of us would be pretty shocked at our time to cross over. If one of our parents showed up with no clothes on, we'd be like, "Oh, mom, get some clothes on." So they do show up in clothes. In the case of my mom, the ectoplasmic wall started to efface up towards the head of her bed, and in walked my mother's mother. We called her Grandma Girl, and she walked in and she looked the exact same as I remembered seeing her last. She even presented with her glasses, and that's it too. They normally present the way that you remember them last in a healthy way. So if someone has lost a lot of weight from cancer, you're not going to see them the way that they looked on their deathbed. You're going to see them the way that you remember them most last time they were healthy, that you'll recognize them in that way. So my grandmother came in and she stood at the opposite side of the bed and she started to stroke the inside of my mother's arm, and my mother was sitting at a slant. My grandmother leans forward and she says something in my mother's ear, and my mother starts doing the eyebrow and the mouthing thing, and it was appropriate. And so my grandmother stands away, my mom's doing that, my grandmother leans forward again and does the same thing. And I see this frantic wave behind my grandmother's head. And it was my beautiful sister, Robin, who had been murdered by a jealous boyfriend when she was 20. And her perfume just filled the room. I mean, she wore an unusual perfume and it just flooded the room. It was so wonderful to smell her. And she came around from the misting, and I was sitting in the chair and she came and she embraced me. I could feel her hair falling over my face. I could smell her. I could feel her essence. And then she went back around and the whole wall had effaced. And there were hundreds of people there. There were angels. There were people that I recognized from this lifetime and some that I didn't. At one point, I told my mom, I said, "Mom, I love you. I'm going to be okay." I kissed her. I said, "But it's time for you to go home. Grandma Girl and Robin are here to take you home, and it's time for you to go." And she did the mouthing thing and the up and down eyebrow thing. And she literally took her last breath in about 10 minutes. But before that happened, there were a group of spirits that were like in a football huddle up towards the head of her bed. And when they opened up, her spirit was standing in the center. It was almost like they were trying to stabilize her spirit feet. And one by one, all of the people in the room started to approach her. And like I said, even people that I didn't recognize, she knew. They were from her lifetime. She knew who they were. But there were these beings there, in addition to angels that were very tall, there were these magnificently, very, very tall beings that appeared to be from somewhere else, because their features were gorgeous, but they were different. And you couldn't tell whether they were male or female. They were just gorgeous, and it didn't really matter. And they were so tall that their heads were like half through the ceiling, and the ceilings were like 10 feet tall. They appeared to be at the level of angels, but they didn't have wings on them. So also I have to say this too, the feeling of love and elation that comes from the other side. And I got to peek in. I mean, there are colors over there that we would need multiple color wheels to even be able to imagine. The light seems to emit from within the atmosphere itself. There was not like an active light source that you could see, but the feeling of love and elation that comes from that other side, there are no words that we have that can describe it. There's no feeling that we have that can touch it, but you can't help but smile. You're when you're in that, being washed in all of that love, and I'm smiling, and it hits me. I look over at my mother, and my mother's stopped breathing. And I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I better call the nurse, because my mother's just stopped breathing. I'm sitting here smiling from ear to ear, and that's not a normal response. They might think that I put a pillow over her head or something. So I called the nurse. The nurse, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I could tell you, because I was speaking to Lynn maybe a week after her mother died. And she told me this, and her affect is just like it is right now. There wasn't any depression. There wasn't any sadness. There wasn't any mourning. I mean, it's like she is right now, right after her mother died. And I noticed that, and I'm like, Lynn, what's going on here? She told me.
Yeah, I never grieved my mother's loss, because to me, she was standing right there and I could see her. So to me, she wasn't dead. When the nurse came through, the festivities were still going on and they didn't seem to be bothered by it. She pronounced that my mother had passed. And then she left, and I asked if I could stay because I wanted to see what else was going to happen. And of course, they eventually filed out past me. But the reason why I say that these beings were from somewhere else, we are energy. And if you want to go from a scientific viewpoint, energy cannot be created or destroyed. And there are other solar systems around the star systems that we gaze at that have planets like ours. And it would be ignorant on our part to think that we are the only species that there is. And when those beings' lives finish wherever they're at, they have to have some place to go to. And I'm not talking about the ones that look like bugs. I'm talking about these beautiful, very tall, kind of human looking, but yet different. Their features are just a little bit different than ours, with this white luminous hair that is just, they all had white luminous hair that was just glowing, that was just beautiful. And the love that came from them was just, again, I feel so blessed to be able to touch in with that, with my mother's passing, my sister's passing also, and other people, when that elation comes into the room that so many people miss out on because they're in their grief. And
have you ever seen other aliens, Lynn, beside those?
I have.
What did they look like?
I was on the show with Linda Moulton Howe on Earth Files, because I had a patient that I swear was some kind of an alien human blend. This woman had very, very large eyes that were almost bulging, like what is that disease? One of the president's wives had it. I can't think of the name of the disease right now, but it's where their eyeballs kind of bulge and they have a big knot on their throat. But she didn't have that. She just had the bulging eyes. And the thing is that there was one night in particular that I went down to her room. It was around 10:30. She was calling for her sleeping pill and her pain medicine. And I went down into the room. I had my blood pressure cuff with me because I was taking her cardiac meds too, and I needed to check her blood pressure before giving those to make sure that it wasn't too low. And when I walked in the room, she's laying on her side facing the door. And again, there's like this ectoplasmic filter, but it was more opaque. And there were literally 3 beings that were standing there of identical size. They had the same uniform outfits on, and their faces, there was like a cloth, but it was like they were looking through it. I couldn't see the faces, but they were standing behind this woman, pulling like an old-time operator switchboard and plugging things back in. So my question was, and I saw them more than once in her room, I saw them multiple times, but it was only her room. And the thing is that every time that I would go in there, I would have to take a manual blood pressure cuff, because if I went in there with a battery operated one, they drained my phone, they drained my blood pressure cuff, I'd have to call out for another one. They'd bring me another one. That one would die. So I finally would have to go in there. So I just automatically started carrying a manual one in with me so that if I ran into that at any time. The second time that I saw them in her room, there were 5 of them, but one was taller. And the taller one came around the side of the bed and literally walked right through me. And that was a talk about a tingling teeth episode, to the point that I even said, excuse me, to the being. And the patient thought that I was talking to her. And she says, oh, no, you're fine. So I saw them on multiple occasions. And when she finally crossed over and passed away, I never saw them in any of the patient's rooms ever again. It was her room with her.
Interesting.
Could you feel that thing when it walked through you?
Yes, I could. What
did it feel like?
It almost made my teeth ache because of the energetic frequency that was so high. I mean, it was a fast thing. It just kind of went through, kind of like sometimes it was a little bit more intense because I've had ghosts walk through me before. I've had those sorts of things happen, but it was even more intense than that, if that makes sense. If you've ever experienced, it's an energy rush feeling from your toes to the ends of your hair. You become aware of even the ends of your hair at that point, in that quick moment. Usually, you just are up to the top of your head, but everything in your fingernails, everything, you could feel that vibration go through, but it was very fast. It was almost a little bit painful because it almost felt like a burn, almost a little bit, because of the high energy and frequency that they carried. And the thing was, is they were working on her and ignoring me being in the room because they didn't think that I could see them. And of course, I wasn't going to mention I could see him because I didn't want him, to invite me to take a ride. So,
What do you mean working on
Yeah.
her? What do you mean working on her?
They were standing behind her, and it was those old time telephone operators that would have the boards with the pegs that you'd pull out and plug in when people would call. You're probably too young to even remember those, but I know Jerry and I are about the same age, so I'm sure he remembers not having those, seeing TV shows about those kinds of things, because I think we were in the telephone era where we would have party lines sometimes, but this was the actual, it looked like they were pulling things out and plugging them back in other areas into the back of this woman. And again, each time, it didn't happen all of the time. It was just once in a while. It was usually around that same clock time, like 10 o'clock, because I'd go in like clockwork to take her medication. She had a time that was a little bit separate from other people because she liked staying up later. Normally everybody was medicated by like 9 o'clock, 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So I would go in at that time, and multiple occasions I would, not always, but on multiple occasions I went in there and saw them. And usually they all were uniform, except that one time that there was one that was taller, but they all still looked the same. They were in the same type of almost astronaut looking type uniform thing, but it was squared off at the head, and it was nothing but material in front. There was no nose or eyes or anything. So my feeling was, is either they were aliens, or they were being operated by aliens, or they were looking through the material, like some of the Halloween costumes that they have now, that you can put the material over your face and see through it.
Did it seem like they were being nefarious or doing good or bad, in other words?
No, they were just busy. They were doing whatever job they were there to do. Yeah, they were plugging things in and out of this woman. I mean, they weren't nefarious. I mean, they didn't bother me. They weren't being evil. The energy didn't feel negative in there, but it felt funny because everything with batteries kept going dead. They kept draining all, like the blood pressure cuffs with the battery operated blood pressure cuffs. I went through 2 of them the first time, and then I ended up having to use a manual one. And I just, after not knowing what I was going to walk into, I would take them. And this lady in particular, she was also very open to things. And there was one night that I was coming down the hallway to go to her room with her medication, and it was snowing, and we were bored. It was it was 10 o'clock at night, and we were having snowball fights in the hallway, which we weren't supposed to do, but we were having fun playing in the snow. And I was walking to her room, and I felt this male energy rush up on the back of me. And I thought that it was one of the other nurses or CNAs that were sneaking up on me, because I had whacked so many people with snowballs. that they were going to get me with a snowball. So I stood there and I turned around fast and I said, boo. And there was nothing there. So I can still feel this nervous energy behind me. And I walk into her room and she's laying there and she says, who's your friend? And I said, well, what friend? She says, well, the man that walked in with you, he's very busy, isn't he? And then I could feel him leave and walk out. And she said, oh, well, he just walked out the door. So she could see the spirit trailing me into her room and identified that it was a man, which is what I picked up and felt that it was as well. So, she was kind of, an interesting lady. But the thing that I've noticed about people, what do they call them? Hybrids, for lack of a better word, like a hybrid kind of human looking alien thing. A lot of times they don't have children. They have that same wild-eyed rabbit look to their faces. I've seen a couple of others that I've suspected, but I can't prove for sure that they were. So, but she definitely had visitors more than once, more than twice.
I've been hissed at before by strange people walking by them. It's been very interesting experiences that you would swear were human, and then they'd look at you and hiss and keep walking, and you go, oh, that was interesting.
Have you ever seen any scaling to their skin where they have that brief moment where you can see the scaling to their skin and then it goes back?
For sure.
I did too. I was having I was in this place getting some blood work done, and this guy was leaning, and I swear his face changed right in front of me and then changed back. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's some kind of reptilian, whatever it is. And I couldn't wait to get out of there. I never went back.
Yeah, I've seen movies of people's eyes changing into the lizard type eyes.
Yes.
For just a split second, and then they turn back.
Yes, and I'm glad that Lorenzo had mentioned that he had seen that too, because I wasn't even going to bring that up because that really sounds way, way out there. But it's not. I believe that there are some alien forms that are living along with us for testing purposes or whatever they're doing, or and even some of these weird things that you hear about, like the Mothman and the Goat Man. I think that those are experiments that they've done on other planets, and they've dumped them here just to see how they survive, and then they freak people out. So
I mean, I've seen possessed children quite a few times, actually, switch from being polite little children to something else, and then switch back again. Black. And switch back again. It's been freaky.
Yes, I've seen. I have not with children, but I've seen that with adults. So
I have too.
Yeah, the eyes go black.
So Lynn, do you have a copy of your book we could see there?
I do.
Or if you want to send me a cover as well, The Colors of Heaven. It's an interesting title. I like that very much.
Let's see. I do. Bear with me one second. I just got a whole box of them in. I'm going to grab this one. Okay, here's the first book. This is Omnipresent. This is the one about the haunted house. This is an actual event that happened in the house when my son was sitting on the master bathroom toilet, seeing those hands come in at him. It was very, very creepy for him. I just got this one back, The Gap, which doesn't have to do with anything spooky unless you've got a teenager, and it talks about things like not wearing smelly sneakers on your first date because no matter how pretty or handsome you are, stinky feet don't win bonus points, and what to do if a condom breaks. And then I've got, bear with me one second. Let's see.
Covering it all.
Yeah. Well, you have to in this day and age. There's a lot of times parents don't want to tell their kids all the stuff that they need to know. And I will be happy, Lorenzo, if you want an e-copy of any of them, to send them to you, to your email. This is Colors of Heaven. This is the Colors of Heaven book, which talks about death, dying, and afterlife, and the things that I've experienced as a nurse, the end of life care. I have one more, which is in a box over there, that if I drag out, it's going to cause an avalanche of books because I just got them all in, called Omnipresent, What Happened Next, which is a story about what happened after I purchased that house and the people that I sold it to and other people. Then it also goes into the mental illness aspect of it, talking about attachments and orbs and all kinds of things like that. The Omnipresent series is going to end up being 5 books total. The 111 Becca Dawn Drive is in editing right now. It should be finished the end of this month and coming out. And it's about a ghost that was going house to house, in townhouses that were connected together, pulling down women's underwear and crawling in bed with them at night. And then I have another one that I'm working on right now called Omnipresent, Gnome Place Like Home, where I've recently ran into a problem with an elemental.
Well, for sure, Lynn, I would love if you send me an email with some of these, and then we could hop. I've got 100 questions that have just come up, so maybe we can hop on some future chats and get, dive deep into the omnipresent and the underwear slipping ghost, so to speak, and go into those stories. It sounds like a fascinating chat.
Yeah,
Well, tell us about
the
orbs. Tell us about orbs.
Okay, orbs. Orbs can be different colors for one thing, and a lot of times too, people they claim that they're dust particles from the rug and things like that. The orbs kind of fly like flying saucers do, where they can go quick and then stop dead, and they can do all of these weird things. And a lot of times you'll see a white segmented tail as they dart in and out of walls. They usually come in gold, green, red, and blue, and sometimes mixes of that, because they'll come together. Usually the red and blue, from what I understand, are heavenly spirits. They're loved ones. The yellow and green are more tricksters, like ghosts that are left here and things like that. But if you get a red and blue combination, it is the worst that you can be. It's usually demonic. So, and I saw a set of those buzz past me when I was in that haunted house, and we had a priest over there that was actively had infrared cameras that was taking pictures of them and getting EVP readings and recordings. But spirits do travel in orbs. A lot of other things travel in orbs too. Aliens travel in orbs as well. It is a transport thing. It doesn't mean that you see something in an orb that it's always a good thing. It may or may not be. But usually, yeah, I mean, what I do is I have people, if they think, before they rent a house or rent a place that they're going to have their work in, I have a thing in the back of the book tells them how to take pictures before walking through on the carpet, so that there are not dust. To take pictures around their fuse box, their creases of their ceilings, their stairwells, their hallways, because they like to kind of join in those areas, because it's easier for them not to have the rippling of people passing through, like in a big room, kind of causing them to move when they're not ready, and to send them to me. And I've got pictures. Sometimes you can even see the faces in the orbs as well.
Yeah, I've noticed that. They have something down here called the Day of the Dead that comes up from Mexico, where, the Americans kind of bastardized it. So they have a parade on the Day of the Dead, and they all dress up like dead people and ghosts and stuff. I mean, in Mexico, they have the pictures of the dead, but here they kind of turned it into almost a Halloween festival. I went there with a digital camera one night, and I was just taking pictures, all this stuff. And when I got the chip out, put it on the computer screen, it started, the thing started out with just a few orbs, and an hour or two later, there were hundreds of them all over the place. I never went back to that parade.
Oh, wow. Well, our orbs aren't always a bad thing. The thing is with spirits is, when a spirit has crossed over and they come back to visit, they're not the ones that stand at the foot of your bed, pulling your covers off or shaking your bed in the middle of the night. They usually come in through your dreams. They come in other ways that are not frightening. You never are afraid of seeing your grandmother come to visit, or your lost dog, for that matter, come to visit, because it's a very warm, beautiful, loving engagement with them. However, souls that have not crossed over, that sometimes come and visit in orbs, can be a little bit creepy. So, because their cause of death still shows, they still have their mental illness, their drug addiction, and all of those sorts of things like that. And they're not always pleasant to look at, especially if somebody like that guy Dapper Dan that I had mentioned to you in the nursing home that I was working at, a skilled facility that I was working at, that I had a lady that was actively passing, and I was at her door getting some medication for her to help her be more comfortable, not for hallucinations, but to dry up her secretions. And I noticed this spirit of this man peeking around these pillars in this sitting area. And eventually I got him to come over to my cart because I'm like, hey, you there. He's looking over his shoulder because he can't, he hasn't been talked to by anybody in probably 100 years. And I'm like, no, why haven't you crossed over? And he comes over and he's got this Swiss cheese appearance to his abdomen, which indicates to me that he died of a corrosive disease like cirrhosis of the liver or maybe cancer. And he was a young man too. He was probably maybe early 30s. He was handsome. He had this very heavy Irish brogue. And I asked him, I said, well, I can help you cross over if you want me to. And he said, me lady, I can't cross over. And I said, oh, sure you can. I can help you cross over. He says, no, my mistress and my wife are on the other side. And neither one knew about the other. So even in death, you can choose to cross over or not. And this man chose not to cross over because he didn't want to have to go in and face his wife and his girlfriend and the fact that he was cheating. So, stuff like that happens, but they have a negative draw to them. Even when people have them in their homes, they're like, oh yeah, we've got a ghost in our house and it's harmless. They don't mean to, but they still have a negative draw. And that negative draw interferes with your sleep. And it drains off of you. It makes you tired. And they don't mean to, whether they're good or bad, but they really shouldn't be there. They need to cross over. So
maybe it has something to do with some unfinished business. I know someone personally who was talking to an older woman in my life who was talking to her dead father when she was coming up some medications for a while that stopped when the medication stopped as well. But, perhaps some of these ghosts come back to help you, do you think, finish up, what hasn't been said, what hasn't been completed before they left?
I do. And the thing about medication is the medication alters your consciousness. So sometimes it even puts you in a state of almost dying, if that makes sense. So you're kind of in that realm as well, where you can see a little bit more and receive a little bit more, even if you're not, even if you don't have a tendency to do that. Some people naturally have gifts, but some of them that don't, when they are on that medication, it alters that consciousness and puts them in place that they can communicate, or see things from the other side.
Do you think it puts some of those psychiatric drugs put people in an increased risk for infestation?
Okay.
Yes.
Please continue chatting. I'll be right back. This is fascinating.
Okay. Yes, I do think that it puts them at risk, especially seeing how, people's arc fields should be coming way, way, way out, probably 6 to 8 feet on either side. Just for a normal person, a person that's spiritual, it even comes out almost as big as the block in the neighborhood. So when they're on those medications, it makes the auric field smaller and very close to the body, which then creates a setting where attachments can come. And the thing is too, is most people, when they have addiction or they're on these medications, we wash our bodies to keep ourselves clean. We brush our teeth to keep our teeth in good condition. We take vitamins to keep ourselves healthy, but nobody addresses the spiritual and the energetic field around people that also needs to be maintained. And it needs to be maintained because of this paralleling spirit world that parallels along with us on this earth that are side by side. So,
and how have you found the best way to maintain that field?
Salt baths, definitely salt baths, and you need to take them for at least, you fill up a tub, you put in 2 tablespoons. I like sea salt or pink Himalayan salt. Epsom's can do it if you want it to, but these other things seem to work a little bit better. And you get in that tub and you soak for 10 minutes. You do not wash in it, no soap in it. It's just for soaking in for 10 minutes. You submerge yourself in it 10 times. Sometimes you might even want to submerge yourself more if you feel like there's something on you. Some people choose to recite Psalms 20. I'd have to look it up.
They hate the 23rd.
They hate the 23rd.
Hate the 23rd Psalm. They hate it. And 91. They hate 91 and 23.
Yes.
I've heard patients say that reciting the 23rd Psalm is like they react like worms and thrown into a frying pan. Now, why would a hallucination consistently do that? And why would a hallucination care about religion? But these things they
Mhm.
consistently don't like religion. They don't like preachers. They don't like the person reading the Bible. They don't like them going to church. They don't want anything to do with religion or spirituality. And that's consistent along with
That
their
is.
consistent negativity.
Yeah, I found
And
some.
So,
Yeah.
to alienate them from people that can help them too. But then to
Right.
recite that, then you get out of the tub, preferably with a white towel because it's a symbolic thing. And you blot yourself off. I mean, your hair and everything gets wet in it. You submerge completely. And sometimes when people have a weakened state with their art field, they need to do this consistently for 10 days for it to finally fill back out, type thing. And you can't miss. If you miss, you've got to start over. And once you get it set, then you can do it weekly or whenever you're around somebody that's really negative that makes you tired because they're an energy vampire, or that sort of thing. Or if you go into the hospital to like the psychiatric ward, yeah, you definitely want to take a salt bath after that. You might even want to take one before you go in there. So but you don't wash it off. You do not shower in that water. You drain it and then you take your shower at a later time.
Yeah, I'm in Japan where they still put salt around the houses at the first of every month.
There you go. I've got
yeah,
salt in all of my windowsills. I've
guess.
got an iron horse thing, and I wear my iron bracelet too. That's another thing too. This is a big one. I had a friend of mine that's a demonologist. He's a magnificent man. And when you think of demonologist, you're like, oh, weirdo. But he's not like that. He's on the good side of religion, talking about the darkness of the demonic world, type thing. And he was the one, because I go into so many situations and I clear houses and I run into things a lot of times, or taking attachments off of people. I needed something that was going to work better because some of the things that I was using was not working. And he recommended the iron bracelet to wear or carry something.
I've heard of that. I've heard of iron a number of times.
Yes.
They said that iron helps.
It does, because
it can't be steel. It's got to be iron.
Nope, it's got to be iron. And that's because that's what they made all of the fencing around graveyards out of, in order to keep the spirits inside.
Oh.
So the iron is important, whether you have it. I wear mine as a bracelet, and I can tell you what, it works. I haven't had any problems with attachments or anything on me, because I have had attachments on me that I have gotten on me by taking them off of other people. And then I've had to go and have them taken off because they weren't mine. They were somebody else's. So, yeah, but I wear this now and it works. I never take it off. Well, I only take it off when I go through airports and stick it in my purse, and then I put it right back on. I bathe with it and everything. You can get them in a place called Etsy, and they're only like $12, but it's money well spent. And you want to wear it on your left wrist, because your left wrist is considered the side of your body that receives. So
where did you get those things?
Etsy, ETSY. It's a little store, ETSY. It's a little store. And you know what? I'd be really curious if a schizophrenic patient would wear a bracelet to see what effect it would have on the things that they're carrying. I would be curious to see.
I could make that happen. So
okay, good.
Is it Etsy.com?
Yeah, ETSY.com. And you just look up iron bracelets and these will come up. They're coded and everything. So that I've had this one for almost a year, and it's never like turned my wrist green or anything. But if you are a practitioner with like what you do, what I do, and what Lorenzo's doing too, we all need to have some form of iron on us, because I was listening to Nathaniel Gillis is the demonologist, and he is, if ever you want to have him on your show too, he would be an amazing guest. He's actually on his way to England right now, to Manchester, to do a class or something. But he was talking about, again, at the end of his show, when the people say, well, what can people do to protect themselves? And he said, wear something iron on their body, either a religious symbol. It doesn't matter if it's a cross or, Star of David, something that is a religious symbol or bracelet or something, but you need to have something iron on your body. And like I said, it's important that if you do choose a bracelet, that you wear it on the left side.
Yeah, I've heard that's where your death lives. on your left side. So maybe that's why, attached to the spirit world, as you say, to the other side where you cross over. So it's very interesting. Well,
Yes.
perhaps we can take this full circle, Jerry and Lynn, and discuss what you feel, patients or people that are challenged or people that have attachments or people that see ghosts, somebody or all of them in a negative way, having these influences. I know, Jerry's mentioned many times, don't do the psychotics, which is obvious. The crazy drugs don't help, they hinder. And what would
They
you
do.
think? Yeah, what would you guys say could be a sweet way to wrap this up to help people that are having some of these challenges?
Well, I think Lynn can verify this. We talked about the MACE energy method, which is a new energetic therapy that has recently come out. And when I learned about it, I was just fascinated. I had to know everything there was about it. Came out in Australia, not by a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but by a ship captain who wanted to know how the mind actually worked. And he spent his whole life researching that. So
Hmm.
this is an energetic therapy. You can go to www.maceenergymethod.com/about/, and there will be practitioners there. But I ran a session with Lynn, so I'd let her talk to you about how that went out, how that went for her. The
Yeah, as a
results are
matter of fact,
quick.
they are. He took, all of us have baggage, and mine took about three hours, maybe 3.5 hours, which was so worth not having to spend years and years and expensive counseling and still not getting to the point that I got to with this. Jerry is a great practitioner. It did work for me. How it feels is that as he took me back into situations so that I could erase the stamps that were left from different traumas in my life. How I was left after the fact was, for one thing, I felt lighter. And for another thing, it's not that I forgot the act that happened. It's that I detached from it in such a way that it was almost like looking through a window at the situation instead of standing in the room in the situation. So it took the anxiety and the flight and fright, feeling out of it, took the emotions out of it. So it could no longer, so they could no longer affect me in my life in certain ways. The way, because before it was hitting triggers, certain things would happen, they'd hit triggers, but those triggers aren't there anymore. So I'm responding differently to the things in a healthier way. But I recommend it. I highly recommend it. And I recommend Jerry. I trust Jerry because I know that what he's doing works. I don't know about the other practitioners, but we can only cut Jerry up into so many pieces to help so many people in a month. But I know for a fact that what he does works. So, and you need to find somebody that you connect with.
It's permanent and it's quick, and it's a
It
lot
is.
cheaper than a psychiatrist and a lot safer than taking those toxic psychiatric drugs,
For sure.
And
that don't work.
And you don't have to go back and dredge up all your crap. You don't
No,
have to,
yeah,
yeah.
that's
And
another
that's the
thing
nice
interesting
part.
about it. Yeah, you
Yeah,
don't have to. The practitioner does not have to know what the trauma was. As long as you know what it is, the practitioner doesn't have to know what it is, so you don't have to dredge up all that stuff all over again and just go through it over and over and over. That doesn't work anyway.
No, and a lot of times people will avoid the therapy because they don't want to have to dredge up all of the stuff, and this does not make you do that. So, like Jerry said, it's great. It's very quick, and for me, it worked in one session. So
Excellent.
I'm very happy with it. So
Excellent. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jerry. I appreciate that. Maybe for some of the people the mace doesn't work, I could recommend a recapitulation of the Toltec ways, but that does involve dredging up everything. So yeah, I guess it would depend on, how deep you want to go or what you need to heal yourself. Obviously, if you can get it in the easy way, I'd suggest that. If you can get it in the hard way, maybe I've had to go deeper, but that's just me. Maybe I've been a stubborn man my whole life. I had to dredge up everything to fix, but whatever works is great, and I'm all for it. So, Lynn, is there anything you'd like to leave our viewers with?
Sure. If anybody needs to get in touch with me, I have a website. It's www.lynnmonet.com. That's LYNNMONET, like the painter.com. I do have an email there that I still answer at this time. Sometimes it takes me 2 days to get to it, but I will get to you. If you have any questions or you need to reach out to me, my books are on Amazon. Not all of them. There are some that are also just on my website. You can buy them. They have them in Barnes and Nobles and all over. If you would like to buy them from me and you're out of the country, the ebook would be the best route because it's the least expensive. Or you would have to order it from Amazon if you need it translated into a different language or whatever. But if you buy them personally from me, I will sign them for you and customize them and get them sent out. So, yeah, please feel free to reach out if there, if I can consult you in any way or get you headed in the right direction or answer any questions.
Yeah, I will leave all the links below. Lynn, it's been a genuine pleasure meeting you. This went in directions I didn't expect.
Thank you.
Like I said, I'd love to have some
you.
more chats on your omnipresent series and the books and the ghosts, because I have 100 other questions that I didn't want to segue into in this one. And Jerry, thanks so much for introducing us. I totally appreciate it.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, thank you.
Just hook up and things like that.
And we have
Jerry,
one book called this will tell you about the psychotic voices, how we came to the conclusion that they are not hallucinations, that they are entities, and that they are vampires. They suck the energy out of you.
I can fully agree on that. I've met a whole bunch myself, energetic vampires. I battle them every day, so to speak, by watching and being careful and being safe and understanding what I have to face. Yeah. The iron works.
Get your bracelet.
The mace works. I've done a recapitulation, which works. The salt works. Maybe it's not one size fits all, but if you want to help and get real help, it seems that there are opportunities out there. Jerry, I'm happy to have you on again soon. Thank you so much. This has been Mind Monsters 11. We'll call it Do You See What I See? It seems an appropriate conversation. Okay. And Lynn, please reach out to me and send me your email so that we can connect and do further things.
Okay, right. Jerry, if you would forward that to me, I would appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me and having us.
For sure. Thank you so much, everyone. I welcome any intelligent contributions, participations, or suggestions, and I'll pass them along. And again, I will leave all the links below. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Jerry. I'll see you all again.
And don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe.
Yes. On the next. Oh, beautiful. On the next one.
Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.
Light of my heart. No one tells me where I should start. Freedom